I was working for Commerce and Insurance at the time, of actually working on the department's budget request, and a coworker who actually was from New York, upstate New York, came into my office and told me a plane had flown into the World Trade Center. Thought, small plane, but they were pulling a TV out. So I went out of my office and looked at the TV and realized it was a much bigger plane than a little Cessna. And about a few minutes after I got out there, the second plane flew in. And at that point in time, I realized that this was not an accident. And that in some way, shape, or forms, our lives were going to change from that minute forward.
I was in the Corner Hole building working for DCS. One of my coworkers had one of those little TV radio combos. On lunch, she would watch her soap opera. And I came in and I set my stuff down, and there was all this commotion in her office. And so I went running over there, and they were replaying the first plane as it hit. She had heard, I think her husband had called her or something. And then we watched as the second plane hit. I'm getting chills thinking about it.
I was in Knoxville, Tennessee on 9/11. I woke up that morning to go to class to get ready, and as I usually do, I turned on the Today Show. And if I recall correctly, I was not in the room with the television because they broke through the regular programming, breaking news, something has happened. And I recall that happening and looking at the TV and going, oh no, there's something that's happened. And at that point, I called my mother to wake her up, to tell her, hey, turn on the television, something's happened in New York City. And we hung up, and then I watched the second plane hit the tower and called her back and said, this is something very different. Our country, the world's changed at this point.
So I woke up that morning in my dorm room at UT Martin as an undergrad and started getting ready for classes that day. I, at some point, turned on the TV, and at that point, the first plane had hit the first tower. So I left my dorm room and headed to my math class. When I walked into the building where my math class was, there was a TV on in the lobby, and then there was a crowd of people in the lobby just watching the TV.
I remember waking up, very vividly remember waking up, and even though I remember it was a very pretty day where I lived, it just felt different in my household, because your parents obviously wake up before you do. And so I remember going to my mom's room, and it was just kind of silent, and I looked at the TV, and I could read at 7. I think that's like a normal thing, but I could definitely read the TV at the bottom, and I saw it. And so I remember that, and not really understanding how that was going to change the world, but I knew it was going to change.
I was minding my own business, working on some contracts on the 12th floor of the Tennessee Tower. And somebody from OCJP came into my office and said, hey, we just heard on the news that an airplane had crashed into the World Trade Center. And I was like, oh, wow, that's weird. I didn't think it was a catastrophe. I just thought it was an unfortunate incident. I was thinking they meant, and they may have thought this too, like a little airplane, a single pilot in a single prop plane accidentally ran into a skyscraper in New York. We rolled the TV into the conference room. I remember I was sitting next to Pat Dishman from OCJP, and when that tower collapsed, she was standing next to me, and she just instinctively reached out and grabbed my shoulder, and I thought she was gonna just rip the flesh off of my arm. Just this grip of panic and terror in her hands and on her face.
Everybody remembers kind of where they were and what they were doing. I was in Memphis, Tennessee at school in the middle of, I believe it was my 7th grade English and Grammar Studies class, Mrs. Mulrooney's classroom. And we were doing a Socratic seminar, and I remember another teacher running in and screaming at our teacher to turn on the TV. We were in one of the only rooms that had TV and cable access. People kept trickling into the room, and we all just kind of sat there with our mouths open and watched the second plane hit the hit the second building and everything crumble, and it was very overwhelming, and I remember very frightening.
And so I had Good Morning America on, and I was still getting ready, and that's when they said a plane hit. And they started showing images, and at that point it looked like it was just one incident, and it was shocking, and you're watching it and you're like, oh my gosh. So as I kept getting ready, I just kind of kept it on, kept listening, and then as I was literally packing up my bags to walk out the door, the second plane hit. And I remember just stopping and staring at the TV. I hadn't even turned it off yet, and just staring, and I felt like I was stuck in my place, because all of a sudden it wasn't just one errant plane where air traffic control went wrong.
That morning I had to go to the hospital for a test. I came out of the test, and it was about 20 after 8 in Central Time, and everybody was huddled around a TV in the waiting room. So I went over to see what was going on, and they were replaying the first plane hitting the first tower. Well, at that point, nobody knew what was going on. So we're all watching, that's terrible. Smoke was pouring out from the first tower. And then while I was watching, standing there, they had live images, and live, I watched the second plane hit the second tower. And when that happened, somehow I immediately knew we were under attack.
I graduated from college about 3 months before that, and had started a new job in investment banking. And we saw the breaking news alert about there being a fire at the World Trade Center. And so we all just stopped what we were doing. We just kind of sat glued to the television. And so, not knowing what was happening, our firm was located in a 30-story building. And so we heard an announcement over the loudspeaker saying, everybody evacuate immediately. And so we all ran out of the building, again, not knowing what was going on, whether or not our building was possibly going to be targeted. And so we all left and then ended up going home.
I'm from Springfield, Ohio, which is about 15 minutes from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So there was some panic that if they were hitting the bases next, because then we heard they hit the Pentagon, that would they come, would it be right there in our backyard? I went home and my mom was like, we got to get gas in all the cars, and we should probably hit the grocery. And I just remember it was like, I don't think we got home till like 10 o'clock that night, because everyone was getting gas and getting groceries, and like, what is about to happen?
Just remember feeling the first responders rushing to the scene of the turmoil, and being impressed that they were so brave and going up there, and they were talking about climbing up the stairways, and then all of a sudden it collapsed, and you could just feel like this was the plan, to get all those people in there, trap them, and then do even more damage. It was just heart-wrenching.
Because I had just found out last week that I was pregnant, and so I was so excited about that. And as I drove off and I'm listening to NPR, it was this moment where they started talking on NPR about it possibly being a terrorist attack, and that there was another plane down. And I just went, what kind of world is this now? What is this new normal when I just had all this excitement?
Going home was strange because they had already, grounded all the planes. I had to drive past the airport, and all you could see was the tail sticking up where they had parked all the planes away from the airport. That was the weirdest thing I have ever seen in my life.
The Pentagon, it bothered me, the fact that a plane had hit and caused that much damage. It bothered me as badly as the towers did. The people that brought down the flight in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry.
The other thing I remember is that you couldn't get through around the interstate at Oak Ridge, because Oak Ridge is on the top list of places. And I just remember my mom calling me going, I want you to come home. And I waited hours to tell her that I couldn't physically get home, because I knew that would heighten it for her of, wait a minute, my child can't get to me.
As soon as the second plane hit, it was like, this is deliberate. There's no way this is not deliberate. This is too much of to be a coincidence. There's what would be the odds that it would just happen, and one hit one tower and the other there's no way. And we just knew. That's when Mike said, you need to go. Go on over there. I'll be over there as soon as I can. And so we knew we were going to TEMA. We knew things were going to change.
It was a very big learning experience for me in my life. Even though my mom tried to teach me the proper way, you still go around and you meet other people and you're exposed to different things. And so you become terrified of anything that's different now because you're traumatized, honestly, especially so young from the incident that happened.
You know, I love New York City. I've been there several times, but it kind of does make me nervous to go. You know, I don't think they would hit there again, but you always just kind of remember, you know, are you safe in a big crowded space anymore? You know? So that always plays in my head, which relates back to 9/11. And then anytime I'm getting on a plane, you know, since then I worry, you know, what if something like that were to happen?
CBS Sunday Morning, they did a series with the AP photographer, did The Falling Man, and people are wearing their suits and whatnot, and you know, just in the sounds as well that you can hear from some of the footage of like the firefighters, people like hitting the ground and whatnot. It's just you hear veterans talk about like D-Day and whatnot, and how horrific that was. I can see like this is another kind of like a D-Day where, you know, we were watching something horrifying happen.
The first thing that appeared to me, or that I recalled, was being physically ill, seeing that those airplanes hit the buildings and knowing that there's no survivors whatsoever on any of those. And it couldn't have been random, you know, especially for large commercial aircraft. It doesn't even make sense. So I guess that was my impression. But my takeaway is that the world's never going to be the same.
I knew immediately that we were going to war, and that just really weighed very heavy on me, in addition to the death and destruction and the sadness of knowing that this was only the beginning of a situation that would take a long time to resolve, if ever.
How do you tell your kids about some of the more horrific moments in our country's history? And I don't know if there's an easy way to do that. And I'm just gonna have to be honest and tell them that, look, there were some really bad people that did some really bad things to our country.
My daughter is 6, and we haven't talked about it yet. I do think it is a moment in our history that changed the country forever. And I do think it's important for her to learn about when it's the right time. I think this year, being the 20th anniversary at her age, it is appropriate to introduce her to it in ways that are age appropriate.
Luckily, my daughter's 3, so I'm not quite facing that decision yet, but I do think when the time comes that it is important to share history, good and bad history, so that we can learn from our mistakes and also be aware kind of our surroundings and potential threats. You know, I work in IT, and so a lot of days now, a lot of threats are virtual, even this day with ransomware and cybersecurity targets.
My son made a statement when 9/11 happened. It was a couple of years later. He wrote a paper in the 7th grade, and he said, I went to school that morning as a 5th grader who happened to be an American, but I came home an American that happened to be a 5th grader.
I was raised by older parents. I was raised by people from the Great Depression era, and they always taught me the importance of remembering history in order to avoid repeating it. And so there are many reasons to remember so many things, and 9/11 is one of those things.
It's important to honor those so many who did sacrifice, who made the ultimate sacrifice, as well as those who are continuing to feel the effects of that damage. I mean, I had many friends who were connected to that, either in New York or elsewhere, that it's a part of their lives, and I feel it's important to pause, to pay respects for what they have sacrificed.
It's important to make sure that not just our children, but just people in general, are aware that there are risks out there. But I think the bigger takeaway for me, in terms of what sociologically we should have learned and continue to try to learn, is to not overreact to that. I mean, that's part of the problem that we have in race today, is that people take some tiny segment of interaction they had with somebody and then extrapolate that to a larger group and create a distrust of a whole group of people.
If we forget as a nation, if we have amnesia for what that hurt was and what it did for our communities, right? You saw folks become neighbors again, folks being aware of people that they don't even know suffering this loss and having an open heart for that.
When it comes to 9/11, the most important thing to me is that people don't forget. It's one thing to say, never forget. It's another to never forget. People have got to remember what happened.